The chapel was bathed in a cold, unnatural light as the guests sat in silence, waiting for the bride. The air was thick with anticipation, but something wasn't right. Everyone turned toward the altar as the priest began to speak. If anyone has any reason why these two should not be wed. The door swung open with a creak, but it wasn't the bride who walked through. It was a child, eyes wide with terror, clutching a crumpled letter in their hand. "She's not your mother," the child whispered, their voice trembling. Gasps echoed through the room, and the groom's face turned pale. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice shaking. The child only stared, not knowing the depth of the words they had just spoken. The bride's mother, sitting at the front, stood abruptly, her face pale with shock. But the child, her child, looked at her with accusing eyes. In the stunned silence that followed, the child stepped forward, still holding the crumpled letter tightly in her hands. She looked up at the groom, her eyes filled with fear, but also with an undeniable truth. The groom, still trembling, took a step toward her, his face filled with confusion and disbelief. "What do you mean by this?" he whispered, his voice shaking. "Who are you?" The child opened her mouth to speak again, but the bride's mother quickly stepped forward, her hands trembling at her sides. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice shaking. "You don't know what you're talking about." But the child's voice, though quiet, was unwavering. "She's not your mother," the child repeated, her gaze never leaving the bride's mother. "She's not who you think she is." The bride's mother staggered back, her face pale and her body trembling. "Stop! Stop this right now!" she cried out. But the child only looked at her with eyes that seemed to pierce her very soul. The air in the chapel seemed to freeze, as the child's words hung in the space between them all. The bride's mother stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. "Please," she begged, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have to understand. This isn't real." But the child wasn't backing down. "She's not your mother," the child repeated again, each word carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. The guests were whispering now, their eyes darting between the child and the bride's mother, unsure of what was happening but certain that the atmosphere was thick with something far more dangerous than any wedding could have prepared for. The groom reached out toward the child, his fingers trembling, but he stopped himself. His heart raced as the truth began to unravel before him. "Why are you doing this?" he asked the child, his voice breaking. "What do you want?" The child's eyes remained steady. "I want you to see," she said simply. "I want you to see the truth." The priest, still standing at the altar, cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. "This is absurd," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the whispers of the guests. "We need to continue the ceremony." But the groom, now visibly shaken, turned to him. "How can you say that?" His voice was sharp, the pain in his tone cutting through the air. "Did you not hear what she said? She's not my mother. She's been lying to me. To all of us." The bride's mother took another step back, her eyes wild with fear. "This is a mistake," she said, her voice rising. "This child is confused. She doesn't know what she's talking about." But the child, undeterred, stepped closer to the altar, her eyes focused on the bride's mother. "You can't lie forever," the child said softly, her voice steady, almost too calm for the chaos around them. "The truth is already here." The guests were silent now, their faces filled with a mixture of disbelief and fear, unsure of what was coming next. The room was suffocating. The child's words had pierced the silence like a dagger, and now the truth hung in the air like a weight no one could escape. The bride's mother's hands were shaking as she tried to compose herself, but the horror was written all over her face. "No, no," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You don't understand. This isn't." She faltered, unable to finish the sentence. The child, however, stood her ground. "She's not your mother," the child repeated, her voice firm and steady, despite the chaos surrounding her. The groom, who had been silent until now, spoke again, his voice low but filled with disbelief. "How could you do this?" he asked the bride's mother, his eyes searching her face for any sign of an explanation. The child turned away from them, walking slowly back toward the entrance. "I've told you the truth," she said softly, her words carrying an eerie finality. "Now, you must face it." The guests remained in shock, whispering among themselves as the child's words reverberated through the chapel. The groom, still stunned, clutched the crumpled letter in his hands as he stared at the bride's mother. His mind raced, struggling to piece together the fragments of the chaotic scene. "How long, Mom?" he whispered, his voice breaking. The bride's mother flinched at the word mom, her expression faltering for just a second. She had always been the picture of composure, but now, with the truth dangling in the air, she was unraveling. "It's not what you think," she began, her voice trembling. "This child is lying. She doesn't know anything." The child, who had stepped back into the shadows, spoke again, her voice steady but filled with a sorrow that seemed to reach everyone in the room. "I know the truth, and one day, you will have to face it too." Her words hung heavily in the air, leaving everyone breathless. The priest stood quietly, unsure of what to do next. The air seemed to grow colder as the priest cleared his throat again, trying to salvage the situation. "Perhaps we should all take a moment," he suggested, his voice wavering. The groom, however, shook his head in disbelief. "No," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the silence. "I need answers now. I can't pretend anymore. I need to know the truth." He turned to the bride's mother, his eyes narrowing. "You've lied to me for years, haven't you?" The bride's mother took a step back, as if the weight of his words had physically struck her. She opened her mouth to speak, but was silenced by the sound of the child's voice once again. "The truth is buried deep," the child said, her voice soft but filled with certainty. "But you can't hide forever. One day, it all comes out." The groom's hands tightened around the letter, his face a mix of anger, confusion, and a deep, aching sadness. "Why?" he whispered, his voice breaking. The priest, unable to bear the tension any longer, walked toward the altar. "This is not the time for accusations," he said, his voice trembling. But the groom was past caring for formalities. "This is my life we're talking about. Everything I believed in is falling apart right in front of me," he snapped, his voice harsh. "And all because she didn't have the decency to tell me the truth." His eyes flicked to the child, then to his mother. "You've been lying to me about everything. My father, my real family. It's all a lie, isn't it?" The bride's mother remained silent, her gaze dropping to the floor. The child stepped forward once again, her small voice carrying a weight that seemed far too heavy for her age. "The truth always finds its way to the surface," the child said, almost as if speaking to herself, but everyone in the room could hear. "And when it does, there's no turning back." Her words echoed in the stillness, leaving the room filled with the thick, suffocating weight of impending revelations. A wave of silence swept over the chapel, and for a moment, it seemed as if no one would speak again. The child's words lingered in the air, as if they were hanging by a thread, waiting to be pulled. The groom, his eyes wide, took a step back. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked in a near whisper, his voice cracking. "How could you keep this from me?" The bride's mother, trembling, reached out, her voice strained. "It was never the right time," she said, her eyes searching for some semblance of understanding. "I never wanted to hurt you. I wanted you to have a normal life. I didn't want to ruin everything." The groom shook his head, his heart sinking. "Normal life," he repeated, his voice low. "You ruined everything the moment you started lying." He turned toward the child, his face full of questions. "Why now?" he asked. "Why bring this up now?" The child simply looked at him, her face soft with sorrow. "The truth always finds its time," she replied. The tension in the room was palpable, the silence so thick that it almost felt like it was suffocating everyone. The groom, struggling to keep himself together, turned to face the bride's mother one last time. "I don't know who you are anymore," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't know who any of you are." His eyes were filled with pain, and the weight of the truth seemed to crush him with every passing second. The bride's mother stepped back, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I never wanted this to happen," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But now that it's out, I can't change it. The child, watching from a distance, said nothing more. Her expression was still filled with a quiet understanding, as though she had known this moment was inevitable. The groom turned to leave, but then paused, looking back at the woman who had been his mother for so long. "I'll never be able to look at you the same way again," he said, before walking out of the chapel. The days after the revelation had been a blur for the groom. His life, once filled with certainty and the comforting idea of family, was now fractured beyond repair. The chapel scene had played over and over in his mind, the words of the child echoing in his ears. "She's not your mother." He tried to speak to her, but every conversation ended in silence or denial. It was as if she had become a stranger in his life. Now, alone, in his apartment, he held the crumpled letter in his hands once more. It felt heavier than ever before. With trembling hands he unfolded it, and began reading the words that had shaken his entire world. "This is your real mother, and she has been waiting for you." His stomach turned as he tried to make sense of the letter, the pieces of his past threatening to shatter further. He couldn't take it anymore. He needed answers. And the only way to find them was to confront her, the woman who had never been his mother. Determined to uncover the truth, the groom made his way to the address written at the bottom of the letter. He had no idea what to expect, only that he had to face whatever was waiting for him. When he arrived, the house was old, weathered by time and neglect. The garden was overgrown, the windows cracked, and the door hung loosely on its hinges. His heart pounded as he reached for the doorbell, his mind racing with questions. As the door creaked open, a woman appeared in the doorway. She was older than him, with tired eyes that held a lifetime of sorrow. Her face softened when she saw him, but there was no immediate recognition. "You must be the one," she said quietly, her voice filled with grief and understanding. The groom swallowed hard, his throat tight. I need answers," he whispered, barely able to get the words out. The woman stepped back, allowing him to enter, and the groom hesitated before stepping inside. The house was small and cluttered, filled with the smell of dust and old furniture. The woman led him into the living room, where photographs lined the walls. Some of her, some of a young boy, some of a family that seemed so distant, yet so familiar. He couldn't help but wonder if these were the images of his past. The woman motioned for him to sit, and he did, his mind reeling as he stared at the photographs. "I never wanted to keep you away," the woman said softly, sitting across from him. "But I had no choice. Your father, he made sure we could never be together." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had always been told that his father had died young, but now it seemed like there were secrets buried far deeper than he could have imagined. "Tell me everything," the groom said, his voice barely above a whisper, the weight of his past threatening to crush him. The woman exhaled deeply, her eyes flickering with pain. "You were taken from me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I had no choice. Your father, he made sure of it. He told me I couldn't raise you." The groom's heart hammered in his chest as he listened, trying to make sense of what she was saying. His mind raced back to his childhood, to the stories his mother had told him. "But my mother, she told me she was my mother," he said, his voice breaking. The woman's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. "I know. I wanted so badly to be with you, to raise you. But I couldn't. They told me you would be safe with her." She paused, as if searching for the right words. "But I never stopped thinking about you." The room seemed to close in around him, the weight of her words sinking in. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. The groom sat back, his mind struggling to process the torrent of revelations that had just been thrown at him. "So everything I knew, everything I was told, was a lie?" he asked, his voice low, almost lost in the gravity of the moment. The woman nodded slowly, her eyes full of sorrow. "I never wanted to lie to you," she said quietly. "I never wanted to hurt you, but I couldn't fight him. Your father had too much power. He made sure you were raised far away from me." The groom's heart sank further. It wasn't just that he'd been lied to. It was the sheer scope of the betrayal, how deep it ran into his past, into his very identity. "Why didn't you ever try to find me?" he asked, his voice breaking as he searched her face. She looked at him, her gaze soft but filled with regret. "I did," she whispered. "I never stopped looking for you." The world seemed to stand still as the groom left the woman's house. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions: betrayal, grief, confusion, and something deeper, something raw that he hadn't yet fully understood. He stood at the edge of the overgrown garden, staring at the cracked sidewalk beneath him, barely feeling the cool breeze that blew through the trees. He thought of the childhood he'd lived, the lies he had been told, and the woman he had called his mother for so many years. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling up behind him. He turned slowly, and there she was. The bride's mother stood there, eyes filled with something that looked like regret, but it was too late for that now. "I should have told you everything," she said, her voice soft but filled with pain. "But I was scared. I thought I could protect you." The groom's expression hardened, a mixture of anger and deep sorrow filling his chest. "You can't protect me anymore," he said quietly. The groom took a step back, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the woman who had once been his mother. "Protect me," he repeated, his voice growing colder. "You think you protected me by lying to me for all these years? By keeping me in the dark?" The bride's mother lowered her gaze, her hands trembling at her sides. "I didn't know what else to do," she whispered. "I was scared. I thought you'd be better off without knowing the truth." The groom's jaw tightened. "Better off?" he scoffed. "You've shattered everything I thought I knew. There's no going back from this." He shook his head in disbelief, his emotions running wild. "What else have you kept from me? What other lies have I been living?" The woman's voice cracked. "I never wanted to hurt you. But your real mother, she's waiting for you, and I know she's the one who can help you now." The groom's world seemed to crack open with those words. "I don't want your help anymore," he said, turning away from her. The groom walked away, his mind swirling with the overwhelming weight of the truth he had just learned. His feet carried him without direction, through streets that seemed unfamiliar despite the countless times he had walked them. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the quiet city, but the chaos in his mind drowned out everything else. He wasn't sure where he was headed, only that he had to keep moving. Then, without warning, he stopped in front of a familiar building, his childhood home. It looked the same as it had all those years ago, though the memories of it now felt like they belonged to someone else. He hesitated before stepping up to the front door, the weight of his past pulling him back. Slowly, he raised his hand and knocked. After a long moment, the door creaked open, and there she was, his real mother. Her face was older, marked by time and grief, but her eyes, they were filled with recognition. "I knew you'd come," she said softly, her voice trembling. The groom stood at the threshold, his heart pounding in his chest as his real mother's gaze fixed upon him. "I've waited so long to see you," she whispered, her voice shaky. The words sent a tremor through him, and he felt an overwhelming wave of emotion rise in his throat. "Why didn't you come for me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman's face twisted with pain as she stepped forward, closing the door behind her. "I had no choice," she said, her voice breaking. "They kept me from you. I tried, but your father's power was too much. I couldn't fight him." The groom's chest tightened as he processed the words. "You should have fought," he said, his voice filled with bitterness. "You should have told me the truth." His real mother reached out for him, her hands trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, her eyes filled with regret. "I thought I was protecting you." The groom closed his eyes, his breath coming in short gasps. "You didn't protect me," he said quietly. "You destroyed me." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with regret, with years of unspoken pain that had been buried beneath layers of lies and silence. The groom took a deep breath, his hands trembling at his sides. "What do you want from me?" he finally asked, his voice hoarse. His real mother lowered her hands, her face crumpling with sorrow. "I don't want anything from you," she said softly. "I just want you to know the truth. I want you to understand why I had to let you go." She reached out once more, her expression desperate. Please, I've spent my whole life wanting to be with you, but I was never allowed to. I had to watch from a distance. The groom shook his head, his eyes wet with unshed tears. I don't know if I can forgive you, he said quietly. But I need to understand. I need to know who I am now. The woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. I will help you, she whispered. The days following the confrontation with his real mother were a blur for the groom. He had left her house in a daze, unable to process all the truths that had come to light. But now, as he sat on the rooftop of his apartment building, the city lights flickering below him, he couldn't escape the overwhelming need to find peace. He couldn't undo the past, and he couldn't forget the woman who had raised him, his so-called mother. But as he stared at the skyline, something inside him shifted. For the first time, he felt like he was seeing the world with clear eyes. He had the power to shape his own future now. He could choose who to forgive and who to let go. His heart ached with the weight of the choices he had to make, but the realization that he had control of his life, finally, felt like a small relief. He wasn't bound by anyone's lies anymore. I have to move forward, he whispered to himself, the words both a promise and a release. The next day, the groom met with the woman who had raised him, the woman he had always called his mother. They sat in a small cafe, the air between them thick with unspoken words. She didn't know what to say, and neither did he. The silence between them was almost unbearable, but finally, he spoke. I need to understand why you lied, he said, his voice steady but filled with hurt. Why didn't you tell me the truth? Why did you keep me in the dark? The bride's mother took a deep breath, her face etched with regret. I thought I was protecting you, she said softly, her voice cracking. I thought you'd be safer, happier if you never knew the truth. He shook his head. But I wasn't happy. I was living a lie, and it's destroyed everything. His words were bitter, but they were also filled with pain, a pain that both of them had caused. I know, she whispered. And I'm sorry, but I was trying to protect you in the only way I knew how. The conversation was long, and by the end of it, the groom felt like he had heard everything, but understood little. The woman who had raised him, who had given him a life full of love and care, had only wanted to protect him. But in doing so, she had built a wall between them, one that now seemed insurmountable. I can't just forget everything, he said, his voice strained. You've taken so much from me. You've taken away my chance to know my real mother, my real family. The bride's mother lowered her eyes, unable to meet his gaze. I know, she said softly. I can't undo the past, but I can't let you go either. There was a long pause, as the groom wrestled with his emotions. I don't know what to do with all this, he admitted. How do I move forward when everything I thought I knew is a lie? She reached across the table, her hand trembling, but he didn't pull away. We take it one step at a time, she said, her voice barely audible. Together. The groom left the cafe, feeling more lost than ever before. Despite the conversation, there were no clear answers, only more questions. As he walked through the city streets, the weight of the past felt heavier than it ever had. He wasn't sure what to do with the information he now possessed, or how to process the fact that his entire life had been built on a foundation of lies. But deep down, he knew one thing. He had to face his real mother. He had to confront the person who had given him life, who had watched from afar as he lived a life that was not his own. His heart pounded in his chest as he stood in front of the door of her house again. This time, he was ready. He wasn't the same person who had walked away the first time. The truth had changed him, and it was time to face whatever came next. He knocked on the door, his hand trembling slightly. The door opened slowly, and his real mother stood there, her face filled with hesitation. I'm here, he said quietly, his voice steady. The real mother looked at her son, her heart heavy with the years they had lost. I never wanted you to find out this way, she said softly, stepping aside to let him enter. The groom stood in the doorway for a moment longer, taking in the sight of her, the woman who had given him life, but had also been forced to watch him grow up from a distance. I don't know if I can forgive you, he said, his voice trembling with emotion. But I need to understand why you stayed away. She nodded, her eyes filled with sorrow. I wanted to be with you. I never stopped thinking about you. She motioned for him to sit down, and they both sat in silence for a moment. We can't go back, she said finally, her voice filled with regret. But we can try to move forward, one step at a time. The groom nodded, his heart heavy but slowly beginning to heal. One step at a time, he repeated. The days after the meeting with his real mother felt like a new chapter, but the weight of everything still lingered. The groom spent hours in silence, reflecting on the painful journey that had brought him here. He thought about the woman who had raised him, the woman who had kept him safe but also lied to him for years. He thought about his real mother, who had been forced to stay away, only able to watch from the sidelines. The truth was a heavy burden, but it was also a release. He had spent so long trying to fit his life into someone else's narrative, and now he was free. There were still so many emotions left to sort through, so many unresolved feelings that would take time to heal. One evening, as he sat by the window, the world outside seemed to continue on without him, but he knew that his life was changing. Slowly he was starting to understand that healing wasn't an overnight process, but one step at a time. The groom received a message from his real mother, asking if he would like to meet her again. The message was simple, yet it carried a weight of vulnerability that made him hesitate. He hadn't seen her since that first painful meeting, and now, with time and space between them, he wasn't sure what to expect. Was he ready to face her again? Could he forgive her for the years of absence and silence? He thought about it for days, the questions swirling in his mind. When he finally decided to visit her again, he wasn't sure what kind of closure he was seeking, but he knew he needed to try. As he approached her house for the second time, a sense of resolve washed over him. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he was starting to accept that it was okay to face the past and move forward, however difficult that might be. As the groom stepped inside the house, the familiar smell of old wood and warmth greeted him. His real mother stood in the doorway, her eyes filled with quiet expectation. This time there were no words of apology or regret, only the heavy silence between them. She motioned for him to sit, and they both settled into the modest living room, the soft ticking of a clock filling the space between them. For a long time neither of them spoke. Finally, his mother broke the silence. I know I can't undo the past, she said softly, her voice raw with emotion. But I hope you'll give me a chance to make it right, to be the mother you deserve. The groom's heart tightened as he looked at her, her face filled with sincerity and regret. I don't know how to forgive you, he admitted quietly, his voice trembling. But I'll try, because I need to understand who I am now. The conversation between the groom and his real mother continued into the evening, the weight of their shared history slowly unraveling as they spoke. You don't have to forgive me right away, his mother said, her voice trembling. I understand if it takes time, but I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. I never wanted to hurt you. The groom sat in silence, processing her words. There was so much anger and pain inside him, but there was also something else. A longing, perhaps, for the connection he had missed for so long. He wanted to hate her for the years they had lost, but in that moment he couldn't. He looked at her, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know what to do with all this, he confessed. But I'm trying to understand, and maybe that's a start. His mother reached out to him, her eyes filled with tears. It's a start, she whispered back. And that's all I can ask for. As the night wore on, the groom found himself coming to terms with something he hadn't expected. He was beginning to forgive. Not completely, not yet, but in small, subtle ways. The past was a tangled web, filled with lies and secrets, but it was also the foundation of who he was. He had spent so much time running from the truth, trying to bury the pain, but now, with his real mother sitting beside him, something was shifting. I think I can try to rebuild, he said quietly, his voice full of emotion. Maybe not everything, but something. I can't keep carrying this weight around. His mother's eyes welled with tears as she nodded, her hand squeezing his. That's all I've ever wanted for you, she said softly. To see you find peace. The groom stood up, looking down at her with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for this chance." The days that followed the meeting with his real mother were full of reflection. The groom couldn't stop thinking about the long path that had led him to this point, the path filled with lies, pain, and moments of unexpected revelation. But now, with the weight of the past finally beginning to lift, he felt something else, a strange, quiet peace that had eluded him for so long. He stood on the balcony of his apartment, looking out at the city that seemed both distant and familiar at the same time. The soft hum of life continued below him, but he no longer felt detached. He felt connected, even if just a little. He had made peace with his past, but the future was still uncertain. He thought of the people he had lost, the family he had been forced to confront, and the choices he had made to get here. Slowly he turned away from the balcony, a sense of closure settling over him. Whatever came next, he was ready. He had healed, and now he was free. The groom had always believed that his life was defined by the people around him, by the woman who had raised him and the secrets she had kept. But now, he knew that it wasn't the past that defined him. It was the choices he made today, the actions he took to move forward. His real mother had given him a second chance at understanding who he was, and he had begun to rebuild that relationship. There was still pain, still unfinished business between them, but he had found something precious in the wreckage, a sense of identity. And with that, he finally felt like he was becoming the person he was always meant to be. He made a phone call to his real mother, telling her he wanted to take the next step together. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. "Let's make up for the lost time." The relief in her voice was palpable. "I've been waiting for you," she whispered. "Let's start now." The reunion with his real mother was not without its challenges, but it was also filled with moments of growth and understanding. They spent hours talking about their lives, their hopes, and the gaps in their relationship that could never fully be repaired. But there was also laughter, shared stories, and the kind of bond that had been waiting to take root for years. The groom realized that while he couldn't erase the past, he could choose to make the future different. His real mother, with her quiet strength and regret, had shown him what it meant to forgive, to heal, and to love without conditions. "We can't change what happened," she said softly as they sat together in her small living room, "but we can choose how we move forward." The groom nodded, a small sad smile crossing his face. "I'm ready to move forward," he said. "And for the first time I feel like I'm not alone." It wasn't long before the groom began to rebuild his life, slowly but surely. He reconnected with old friends, people he had lost touch with during the turmoil of the past. He found solace in the small things, the familiar rhythm of his daily routine, the moments of laughter that felt lighter now, as if a weight had been lifted. His relationship with his real mother continued to grow, and even though there were still unresolved feelings, there was a mutual understanding that their bond was not defined by the past, but by the present and the future they were choosing to create together. The groom had started to forgive, not just the people who had wronged him, but himself. He had spent so much time carrying anger, hurt, and confusion, but now he realized that it wasn't about forgetting, it was about releasing. And so, each day, he moved forward, letting go of the past while embracing the possibilities of the future. One final day, as the groom stood at the edge of a cliff, looking out at the vast expanse of the ocean below, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. He had come so far, further than he ever thought possible. The past, with all its pain, was now just a part of his story. He had faced it, accepted it, and learned from it. But it no longer controlled him. As the sun began to set, casting a soft orange glow over the horizon, he took a deep breath and whispered to himself, "I'm free." It was a simple phrase, but it carried so much weight. He had reclaimed his life, his identity, and his peace. In that moment, he knew that no matter what came next, he was ready. He had found the strength to heal, to forgive, and to move on. The world was his again, and he was no longer afraid.